Welcome to DCIA September seminar. My name is Avina Wang, and I'm delighted to be able to host this event. I'm VP membership of Texas Tech Talk Toastmaster Club. Our club is chartered earlier this year by the founders of DCIA, which is just one of many shining examples that demonstrate the great effort that DCIA has provided to help Chinese IT community to unite and improve our careers. Today's agenda is shown in the slide. Our first 80 minutes will be keynote speeches, and the next 40 minutes will be Q&A. To make the best of your time, we have muted everyone, but be free to ask questions in the text box during our speeches, and your questions will be addressed in the Q&A session. And I will also remind our speakers if we are at top of the hours. Without further ado, DCIA is very excited to bring you the topic today: technology's crisis of purpose and how we can solve it. So have you ever wondered what is the purpose of technology? As of 2021, software companies are reaching record high valuation and profits. Yet 60% of Americans reported struggling with loneliness. What are software companies doing to solve the world's biggest problem, our humanity? Well, two extremely bright young entrepreneurs, brothers, students at Columbia University, as well as UT Austin, not only have put a lot of thought to this question, but also have taken tremendous actions. They co-founded platform Big and Mini to connect youth and older adults to combat loneliness and bridge the generation gap. Big and Mini has grown rapidly to more than 4,000 members from 50 states over 60 countries. Their work has been featured in many media outlets, including New York Times, Wall Street Journal, as well as NBC Today Show. Big and Mini has also won the first place of AWS US University Startup Competition. In this talk, they will draw on personal experience and the industry research to explore reasons why software has drifted away from solving humanity problems and the concrete ways in which IT professionals view their career with not only passion, but also a purpose. Now, please join me and welcome our distinguished guest speakers today, Alan Zhou and Anthony Zhou.
Hello, so I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so there we go. A little quick preview of the slides. So thank you, Avina, for the introduction. So I'm Anthony.
And I'm Alan.
And yeah, we're really honored and happy to be here and speak to you today. So for today's talk, we're going to start by kind of drawing on our personal experience and talking about our story of founding Big and Mini. And Alan's going to mainly handle that, and I'll chime in certain sections. And then after that, we're going to go into the headline topic for today's talk, which is about technology's crisis of purpose and how that applies to our careers in the tech industry. So let's go ahead and switch screen shares right now.
Awesome. I'll start sharing mine. Share sound. Well, yeah. Thanks for the awesome introduction again. Anthony just mentioned that, but just want to repeat it. But yeah, hi, I'm Alan, and I'm one of the co-founders of Big and Mini. And we're a company that creates meaningful one-on-one connections between young and older adults. So I'll get into that a little bit, but I want to start by setting the scene. And imagine a world where a 71-year-old writer with no nearby friends or family meets a 19-year-old English major struggling to find her place. A year later, they're still calling weekly and bonding over everything from recipes to Shakespeare. That's the reality for Nicole and Connie, a big and mini match that you see here. Young and older adults are struggling without meaningful connections. Loneliness is on the rise, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic, yielding more depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses. Meanwhile, the current digital landscape has largely excluded older adults from collective conversations, and young adults are in need of mentorship. But don't just take it from me. Here's Connie sharing her experience.
I certainly feel lonely actually fairly often. I just miss having some people who would be happy to see me.
Yeah, and loneliness is a huge problem. And that's why we created Big and Mini, a platform that creates meaningful, authentic connections that link generations together virtually to share stories, form bonds, and combat loneliness. With over 70% of older adults having access to tech, now is the perfect time to make virtual connections happen. Given our target audience and purpose, we've strived to make our website as accessible and easy to use as possible, with one-click integrated video calling and scheduled matches. For example, we recently had a big named Anita share her sign-up experience. After entering her email, she completed her profile, sharing her interest in art and politics. From there, we automatically matched her up with Merrick, a mini interested in social justice, for weekly conversations at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. In Anita's words, one of the best parts of the experience was the ease of use, as she only had to click one button to talk to Merrick. With this simple user flow, we've seen resounding success in what both bigs and minis have been able to get out of the platform. For example, just a few weeks ago, Connie, who you met earlier, and Nicole, her mini, Connie celebrated her birthday over the Big and Mini platform together with Nicole. And let's hear what they have to say about their connection so far.
I'm just thrilled to death that she's willing to talk with me. And I love the fact that you trust in God, that you want to do right things and keep growing. I'm so happy for you about the Dean's List. That's just lovely.
I love the different stories you tell. I just think you're just a super iconic person. I think I said that the other day, but I'm like,
What does that mean? What do you mean?
like, it's another word for awesome.
What a beautiful connection. But of course, these life-changing connections aren't the only ones. There are hundreds of more stories like this and the potential for millions more. As an organization prioritizing social impact first, we have and will always keep our main platform free to help those that need the help the most. However, to remain financially viable, we've created a metrics and software licensing-based model that allows us to apply our matching algorithm to a variety of contexts called Big and Mini for organizations. Our paid model focuses on providing organizations like senior living facilities with features such as an admin dashboard. Through this dashboard, they can see who their bigs and minis are matched with, facilitate group activities, and track individual engagement over time. Our platform is the first widespread scalable platform to allow for this level of intergenerational connection. And today we have over 40 organizations participating. In the last 16 months since Big and Mini got started, we've had over 1,900 reoccurring matches from 60 countries in all 50 states. And these matches last around 5 months on average. We've also seen our mission resonate with those also working in the space, raising more than $100,000 from places like Encore.org, Amazon Web Services, and more to support Big and Mini's work and propel our mission forward. Additionally, we've been featured in over 50 media outlets, including the Today Show, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. So at the heart of our great community is our team. And you can see Anthony and myself there. And it starts with our founders who have differing and complementary skill sets that allow us to work efficiently and overcome obstacles over time. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the support of our diverse advisors coming from a variety of backgrounds, ranging from senior living to pediatric health. Our mentors have given us the industry know-how and outside perspective that we need to succeed. So to wrap us up, let's hear from one final match. Meet Carol and Avery, a pair whose connection goes so deep that they can't wait to hug each other when they can finally get together.
You tell great stories.
Really?
Yes. Honestly, some of the things you've told me have been straight on the mark and reflecting what's going on in my life, and I've learned great things from you.
Oh my gosh, Avery, thank you. The thing I like about Avery is her openness. I really noticed that you love yourself.
Oh,
And that will encourage me to do the same about myself.
oh, thank you. That was so sweet.
Now, if I could just give you a hug, maybe one day we'll do that.
One day, we'll get there eventually.
No doubt.
Let's end loneliness, one big and mini match at a time. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that little foray into the organization that we founded, Big and Mini. And that's, yeah, I'd love to answer questions after Anthony concludes his section, but now I will pass it off to him.
Okay, yeah, so that was kind of an intro of Big and Mini. And so I guess if you just put questions in chat for now, we'll probably do questions right after I finish my section of the presentation. And hopefully like a large section of this session will also just be answering questions at the end. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and go into the second part of our presentation. So technology's crisis of purpose and how we can solve it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try and zoom out a bit and consider the tech industry as a whole and what the problem is. Like, what is the crisis of purpose that we're talking about? And to set the scene, you can imagine like two perspectives on this issue. So first of all, you can look at GDP growth over time. If you look at the past like hundreds of thousands of years, ever since humans have existed, the GDP of the world has stayed roughly stagnant. It stayed roughly constant over time until about 300 years ago when the Industrial Revolution started. And all of a sudden, the economic value of the world just started going, it shot straight up. And for the past 30 years or so, we've seen exponential growth going only faster and faster. And the other perspective on that same issue is that not only has economics exploded exponentially, but communications technology has as well. And what that means is we have technologies like the internet, like the telegraph and telephone. We all have mobile phones in our pockets. And that means that one brand can now reach the entire world where previously it could only reach a local community. And what we've seen then is something called the attention economy. And that's kind of the central topic we're focusing on today, is like, what is this attention economy and what are the problems it's created? And how can we try and move away from those problems to actually make software make the world better? And so if you look at a simple example of going into the attention economy, in the past, shoemakers mainly competed on the basis of price and quality. So if you had a local cobbler in your medieval European village, the shoemaker would probably sell a couple pairs of shoes a week to some of the local residents in their village. And whichever shoemaker made the cheapest and best quality shoes would win the competition. Now, though, it's different. Now, instead of competing just on price and quality, companies compete based on their brand. And really what that means is companies compete for space of attention. They want the public to be able to know the brand. And that's why you see companies like Nike and Adidas run huge Super Bowl ads, etc., and try and create huge media hype around their products. And this isn't to say that we're completely based on just marketing now versus like actual quality. Obviously, both are still important and both have always been important. It's just that we're shifting to a model where, because of increased communications abilities, attention is more important than it used to be, because there's more ways in order to get people's attention. And then the other thing, tying back to economic growth, is that because money is like essentially unlimited now, because the economy is growing exponentially, that means that the limiting factor for consumers actually becomes time. Because technology increases the value of the total economy at such a rapid pace, we have so many choices now that companies are increasingly competing for time as a limiting factor rather than money. And so to go into this deeper, how this specifically applies to tech, well, in the tech industry, especially in software companies, in social media, and even companies like Amazon and Apple, impact is often quantified by engagement. So for Facebook and Google as the most direct examples, they make almost all of their money from ads. And as a result, like the more you use Facebook, the more money they make. The more you use Google, the more money they make. So the goal of software is often to just take slices out of like your attention pie. If you imagine your day as a pie with like this amount of attention, then each like social network or like Amazon or Walmart wants to take like a slice out of the pie. And that's why you've seen these like huge problems with companies like Facebook. Facebook's the most notable example, like promoting all the wrong sorts of content because their goal is engagement rather than any sort of social good. And now we have to question, is that really what we want for our economy? Do we want companies to just be competing for our attention only instead of actually looking for things that make the world better? And now we're going to kind of dive into a different perspective on the background and sort of an analysis of the tech industry. And I think this is interesting not only from the perspective of social good, but just from like the perspective of startup strategy and like kind of how competition in the software world works. Let's see. Okay. So first of all, like, why is this problem hard to solve? And the reason is because software has these interesting monopolistic tendencies or tendencies towards monopoly that traditional industries didn't have. And so the three things that I want to focus on are economies of scale, zero marginal cost, and network effects. And I'm going to dive into each of them right here. So economies of scale, you may have heard this in like an introductory economics class, but the idea is the bigger a company or an organization is, the cheaper it is for them to produce goods. And the reason is because there are certain fixed costs, such as product design, for example, that don't scale with the quantity of goods produced. So like I pay one designer X amount to design a product, and then that same design can be applied to a million different widgets. And this is actually an effect that tends companies towards monopoly, regardless of what industry you're in, but it also applies to software where there are a fixed number of designers and a fixed number of like set costs, no matter how many products you produce. But software is actually even more extreme than just having economies of scale because software has zero marginal cost. So the more software products you make, the cheaper each one becomes to manufacture, in that like software doesn't cost anything if you want to make like the 1001st web app. Like let's say I have a website like Facebook. If I have 1,000 users, it might cost like a certain amount of money. If I have 1,001 users, it costs barely more. Essentially the difference between like 1,000 users and adding more users, like it doesn't actually add more cost of the good. Rather than having to pay for the raw materials, I can just pay for like the initial setup cost, and scaling up the software is much, much cheaper than scaling up like any sort of physical product where the costs are tied to the cost of the raw materials. And then finally, there's network effects, where the more people who use a platform, the more useful it is. This is most notable in platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and various like chat apps like WhatsApp or WeChat, where it's like, because all your friends are using it and your family, then when you use it, like it has more value for you. And as a result, like you don't want to try this random new social media app because no one else is using it, and therefore it doesn't have that social network value. But there's actually a secondary effect as well of like just having more users being useful, in particular in software, because of the power of data analytics and being able to see like if everyone likes this product and we have these data points, then Amazon can recommend you like this product as well. And that's a differentiating factor that Amazon can provide by virtue of its large user base that smaller companies coming in can't provide. So these three things, economies of scale, zero marginal cost, and network effects, are big reasons why software companies tend towards monopolies in a unique way that previous companies didn't. But like, why do we care? Why do we care if software companies are monopolies? And why do we care about the existence of monopolies in general? So I want to read this quick quote from Ben Thompson, who runs the Stratechery blog and the Exponent podcast. He says, when you start out a company, you're walking around and you have complete freedom of movement. And then you get some processes in place, you get better at things, and now you're riding a bike. And then you're driving a car, and eventually at some point, the best, most efficient companies are like bullet trains. They're so much faster than anybody else and so much more powerful and so much more efficient. It's like, how can I compete with that? So if you think about a company as a bullet train, that means that it's very, very like fast and efficient at getting to some place. But what if you want to go somewhere else? And the problem with the existence of a bullet train is that the vast majority of people are going to use the most efficient mode of transportation. They'll go on the bullet train and go to like the fastest destination, which makes it much harder to sell, for example, the idea of like riding a bike someplace once you have a bullet train, because it's so slow. And that's why having a monopoly, it encourages going from point A to point B, but it makes it harder for a new company to take you from point A to point C, to try and do something different. But if you continued this quote, the thing that he says next is very enlightening. And what he says is that if you do want to go to point C, then actually the bullet train won't take you there, which is to say that a company, even if it has a monopoly in one space, like software companies can actually innovate if they just will go in a different direction. And we're kind of going to go deeper into that point later on when we try to talk about like what a solution is to this problem that we're talking about. And the other factor that's preventing companies from trying to kind of like address the problems of like a lack of purpose in technology is that, I mean, you've probably heard this, but like, that's great, but how are you going to make money? And we certainly heard this with Big and Mini, although I think the tide is turning to where more and more people are believing in the idea of like a purpose-driven startup actually working. But even in our experience, it's always like, how are you going to do good and make money? Like at some point you have to compromise. And it brings you to this essential question. Does capitalism allow companies to do good while making a profit? And so here we get to talk about some more economics. Like, does capitalism allow companies to do good while making a profit? So I guess first, like, we can all kind of think about in our heads what we think the answer to that is. And now I'm going to attempt to answer the question, but whether or not you accept my answer is up to you. And we'll have some like discussion or question time at the end where we can kind of challenge the idea. But what I think is that because we're all like technology people here, we can think of the market as just another technology. And the purpose of the technology is to share information among the constituents of the market. So in that sense, then, the perfectly efficient market is a perfectly efficient information sharing machine, like in the form of both stock prices and the prices of goods and the prices of services. We're communicating information about how much we value the different things that exist in the market. So a perfectly efficient market would give you like perfect information sharing capabilities, theoretically. But what kind of information are you sharing? Well, if you think about it this way, the market is actually agnostic to whether you're sharing information about like purely capitalistic, like greedy ideals or like purpose-driven ideals. So in reality, it's not the intrinsic mechanisms of the market that determine where the world is going. It's really the attitudes of the people that constitute the market who are sharing information within the market. So it's really our attitudes that count. And so here's one of the most I mean, you may have heard of this concept before. This is one of the biggest criticisms to the idea that companies can do good, or that a capitalist system can result in a better outcome. It's called the tragedy of the commons. So he says here, when short-term self-interest leads to tragedy for all. So the person on the left here, this is maybe in the past, or they're saying oh, water belongs to anyone, so I can take as much as I want. And so they start using a ton of water. And then maybe the other guy, who the first guy is talking to, is okay, this guy's using a lot of water, so let me also use a lot of water. And so then he sets down his own well and then starts drilling water. And then you have this random other villager who's seems there's less and less water these days. And it's because you have this common resource that everybody's sharing. And because everybody's sharing it and there's no regulating entity, then the rational incentive for a person is to use as much as possible to benefit themselves. And the story actually originally comes from the commons as a common piece of land in medieval, or not medieval, slightly later than medieval, I think. But historically in England, they would have a common piece of land where everyone in the village could graze their cattle. And originally, everyone would just graze for a few hours and then take their cattle off like good people. But then the story goes that someone suddenly let their cattle graze for an entire day, and then all of the grass was gone. And then the next day, some of the other villagers felt angry at this first guy, and so they decided to also graze their cattle for way too long. And by that point, all the grass in the commons was gone, and the environment of the area was destroyed, and then all the cattle had nothing to eat. People often use this idea of the tragedy of the commons as an analogy for why companies are destroying the environment, because Nike has no incentive to protect the environment when Adidas is right across the street just polluting ridiculous amounts of pollution with their shoe plants. So they'll both compete to pollute as much as possible, as long as it increases their efficiency. And the same goes for countries in their strategic investments in fighting climate change, because every country wants to help its economy, but doesn't really care about the common resource that is the climate. And that's the tragedy of the commons. But there's actually a reason to not be so skeptical and not be so cynical about where the world is going. And we can start with this letter from Larry Fink, who is the founder and CEO of Blackrock. I'm not sure if he's still the CEO. He's definitely the chairman of Blackrock, which is the largest, are they the largest? One of the largest investment firms in the world. And they manage I think trillions of dollars. Basically, this guy is a super investor. You can think of him as representing the interests of the investing world. And he wrote this letter to CEOs saying climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. Last September, when millions of people took to the streets to demand action on climate change, many of them emphasized the significant and lasting impact that it will have on economic growth and prosperity, a risk that markets to date have been slower to reflect. But awareness is rapidly changing, and I believe we are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance. What he's saying in this letter, and he goes on to introduce evidence about specific things that climate change is changing about finance. What Larry Fink is saying is essentially that investors now care about sustainability. And the thing is, at the end of the day, the market is composed of people who have the same long-term incentives. And we all have the long-term incentive that we want the economy to be healthy for a long time, and we want our world to be healthy for a long time. It wouldn't be much good if one of your portfolio companies, say you invested in a coal company, made a short-term profit at the expense of your investment portfolio as a whole. So as we start to see these winter storms or droughts or fires just happen all over the world, we're seeing the effects of climate change really start to happen. And investors see that too. So that information gets incorporated into the market in the form of investors saying, wait a minute, maybe we should be looking at the long-term sustainability of our portfolios. And increasingly, you're seeing investors start to invest in long-term thinking, purpose-driven companies, as opposed to short-term, like exploitative companies, just like as a counterbalancing force against like the company's own self-interests. So investors are actually, in their long-term views, able to help companies with purpose, like leverage their positions against like these companies that are just pursuing short-term gain at the expense of like the environment or like the social fabric. Okay, so that was kind of like some historical and economic background on this idea that like whether companies are doomed to like exploit and make the world worse, or whether they can have purpose. And hopefully you're starting to believe a little bit that companies, even in a capitalist system, can indeed like do good for the world. But now we're going to go and move into the present. And in the present, we have some like big countervailing trends that are opposing this crisis of purpose in technology. Or another way to say it is that these aren't really countervailing trends. These are like reasons to believe that technology does have a purpose and that we can have purpose in our own companies, in our own lives, in tech. So like there's two main kinds of approaches to fixing the problem. And the first is top-down. When we talk about top-down, it's really regulation-based approaches. And these are the things that the government can do. So you have, for example, Lena Khan and the FTC. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission, and their goal is to protect consumers by breaking down monopolies. And we talked about earlier why monopolies are bad, because they can prevent innovation where innovation might be sorely needed. And just like in the past couple of weeks, actually, you've had this case of like the Federal Trade Commission versus Facebook, and they're challenging Facebook as being a monopoly. And they say that because Facebook bought like WhatsApp and Instagram, they were engaging in like anti-competitive practices. Now, I don't know if I can offer a stance on this specific situation other than that it's happening. But the other thing to know is that like was it the Supreme Court, or I don't know which court it was that like made the decision, but they like actually rejected the FTC's initial antitrust case, which is pretty interesting. It has implications for like how effective this approach might be, because it seems like it's not actually working very well. But we'll see if the new revised case actually makes it through the court. Just something interesting to think about. So that's part of the top-down approach. And the other part is like actual regulations, often in the form of taxes as an economic incentive. So you have, for example, the idea of a carbon tax, which is like really made its way into pop culture. You tax like the amount of carbon that a company emits. In doing so, you incentivize the company to emit less carbon. And that's pretty straightforward. And it seems to be a pretty effective solution when implemented, at least in like limited test cases so far. You also have like, if anyone has bought or like looked into buying a Tesla, there's like an electric vehicle tax credit. And so you can see how the government can incentivize innovation by like incentivizing consumers to buy new things that might be better for the environment. And finally, there's this idea of a robot tax. So you look at like another big problem in society today is increasing inequality. And well, depending on how you look at it, that could be a problem or not a problem. But like there definitely is the problem that inequality leads to increased social distrust, or leads to the breakdown of social trust. And this is like a finding that's been replicated across like sociology and psychology in a lot of different societies. And one reason people think this is happening is because of automation and because of robots. And the idea is that like, if technology does a certain amount of work that a human can also do, the technology is not taxed, but the human actually has to pay payroll tax. So the payroll tax is like 7% or so. And then plus like personal income tax comes out to like much more than that. But even for the company, there's like a payroll tax. So the technology that does the same thing as the person can be 7% more expensive and it still makes economic sense for the company to use the robot instead of the human. That's why some people propose that you should add like a tax onto robots, onto automation, in order to incentivize companies to continue to hire humans as opposed to replacing them with robots. But at the same time, that's like super hard to implement, because how do you define like what the automation is, and like what's the scope of the task, and how much are you supposed to pay the robot anyways? I don't know. Very difficult questions to answer. And then here is the other kind of approach to fixing the problem, which is bottom up. So rather than looking at the government to do all of our regulation for us, we can also look at our own lives and see like, is there anything we can change about the world? And that's where you see these like purpose-centric venture capital firms, VCs, and startups. These are like the bottom-up approaches to fixing the problem. And I think Alan knows a little more about VC than I do. So if you want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, sure, I can touch on it. So these are just some venture capital firms. Norskin is one based in Europe, and Lower Carbon's here in the States. And they both just believe that profit and purpose are aligned, and that investing for the sake of purpose does not affect negatively the profits that you'll receive. So in my opinion, really exciting. And I believe in those two philosophies, and there's some research to back it up if y'all want to look into that as well. But yeah, both of these companies back really exciting startups. Norskin does like general impact investing is what it's called, which is investing based on potential positive impact to society. And then Lower Carbon focuses on lowering carbon, as its name suggests, and has backed some really exciting like carbon sequestration and stuff like that, startups. So both really exciting venture capital firms that are kind of investing in the early stage companies that'll have a lot of impact on our society in the long run. And then these are two, Big and Mini is one, hopefully you'll know what they do now. But Allbirds started by a previous professional New Zealand soccer, like national team soccer player. He just wanted to create this shoe out of like more sustainable and comfortable materials than was currently on the market. And they've ended up being very successful and a really large company today. So they are an example of a company that has a sustainability focus that is doing very well. So yeah, that's a little bit about stuff on the slide.
Cool. Yeah, and obviously there's like so many other like VC firms and startups that aren't on this slide, but there's more every day. And I think it does seem like there's an increasing focus on like this idea of purpose-driven companies and VCs, like just in the tech industry in general. And that's like in a macro sense, that's because of the exact effects we were talking about earlier, where investors are starting to look at sustainability as like a serious thing that actually affects like the long-term health of their portfolios. So there's more and more money going into like purpose-centric ventures. And so far we've gone into kind of like a lot of the theory about like how we're kind of getting into this problem of where technology is not like creating that much value, or it feels like there's so many people creating so much like money in technology, and yet it's not reaching the masses in a lot of cases. And then we talked about kind of like whether it's even possible for in a capitalist society for companies to do good. And then clearly it is possible, and clearly there are companies and VCs that are seeking to address this very issue. But now we're kind of going to move a little bit away from theory and into kind of like how we can really take this into our own lives. And we're going to go into basically a couple of suggestions, but they're really more of inspiration or ideas than prescriptions. So this is kind of like a way to start a discussion of how are we going to take the things we just learned about like purpose and the things we already know and are taking into this discussion and apply them to make the world better. So one of the first things, maybe you've seen this before, it's called the goal hierarchy. It's like a form of task management. So like every major action that you take should tie into some kind of broader purpose. So the way this works is like you have some kind of top level goal. And you can do this for individuals and companies. So for Big and Mini, our top level goal is like combat social isolation and bridge the generation gap. And like you have these lower level goals where we get into more and more fine detail. So it's like, oh, we got to build a website. We got to like build a sign up system and an account system. And we got to build like this screening form. And we got to like test the software to see if it's actually usable. And these become like more and more specific actions as you go down the hierarchy. But just by conceptualizing it all as like coming down from a top level goal, you're able to see how every little action that you take actually fits into a broader purpose. And this applies both to like your own life and then also like the things you might be doing in work. But this is just one approach, and like I'm sure there are like plenty of other ways that you could conceptualize like doing things with a purpose that don't involve this exact layout. But it's an idea. And another thing we can do is thinking about hiring, screening for mission alignment. And the idea is that like producing the correct features is much important than just producing features correctly. And that is to say, like it's much important to focus on the right things and maybe take longer to do them than to like very quickly produce a ton of things that maybe no one actually wants or don't actually do good for the world. So kind of what we think about is like the people who can prioritize and spend their time on the right things are usually more valuable to the company than the people who can do a lot of things, but maybe aren't as good at deciding what fits into like the mission of the company. But this probably depends a lot depending on like what industry and what company you're in, because I'm sure the incentive structures would change a lot. It's just a general idea that like mission alignment is very important in terms of the people who you work with in a company. And finally, continue the conversation. So today has been basically a presentation of a whole bunch of different ideas. And you may not agree with all of the ideas, but the idea is just that we can start thinking about how technology can increasingly have a real purpose outside of just profit and engagement, where we're looking at like the biggest problems in society and how we can solve them. And technology is finally getting to a point, and society, more importantly, is getting to a point where people realize that purpose-driven technology is a thing and it's viable. And so you could attend and organize events about purpose-driven technology. You can support companies and individuals who are looking to make the world better using technology. But at the end of the day, as I said, these are all just suggestions. And the most important thing to do or to take away from this talk is just to take a chance to question the way things are done. Like if a company is working just for profit or engagement, like how can that company also have purpose as a part of its mission? And I think just by asking that question, like it'll help us all to see how the principles of social good can change our careers, our communities, and our lives. All right, so that went a little faster than well, that went pretty fast, basically. So we have plenty of time for questions. And so I guess we can just open the floor up now and use the chat box to add anything. Do you guys want to, or Alan or Avina, anything to add on?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Alan and Anthony, for bringing us a lot of beautiful thoughts and being the inspirations for all of us to be more open-minded and find solutions and find purpose. So we already collected a few questions here. I think what I'm gonna do is to go over the question and either of you can answer to them. Would that be fine?
Sounds great.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So the first question is, how do you ensure the one-on-one match is a good match?
Yeah, I guess I can take that. That's a great question. We didn't really get into it that much, but basically during the user onboarding, when people sign up, we ask each big and mini a bit about their background and interests. So like, what are they like in terms of like food or sports, or what hobbies do they have? What do they do, like spend most of their time doing? Questions like these that help us gauge who the person really is. And then we use those personality and character kind of metrics and traits to find someone who's compatible. And then that's how we try to make a good match.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Anthony, do you have anything add on to that question?
No, I think that definitely is pretty much the crux of it, which is that like the goal is just to make sure that like the two people will really have like not only common interests, but also areas where they're different enough to spark conversation and form a deeper connection.
Perfect. Got it. Thank you. And the second question is from myself. So when we talk about tie the profit into purpose, how can we make humanity problems, including loneliness, global warming, climate change, become profitable to investors before they grow into a very severe and inevitable situation?
Well, so this is like a really big question. And I guess like if you had a universal answer, it would be very, very useful, because that is kind of the core question of every like purpose-driven startup. But in many cases, the mission of the startup really adds to its, I guess just from one perspective, it adds to the appeal from like the consumer side, where if a company has a compelling enough story about how it's doing good in the world, I mean, Allbirds is a really good example of this actually, because Allbirds, like part of their whole mission and their ethos is that they're a very sustainable company. And so as a consumer, when you purchase a pair of Allbirds shoes, like you can feel good about your purchase, and that adds like a differentiating factor compared to, for example, like Nike or Adidas, who might not care nearly as much about sustainability. So when you incorporate social good as part of the mission, that like tells a story that consumers will really love and enjoy using your product. And then investors care a lot about how your consumers think. And so if they like your product and they like your story, then that makes it more likely for an investor to invest in the problem. But that's just one perspective.
How about Alan?
Yeah, I agree. I think it starts with the consumer, because if not enough people care about solving these big problems, then it's not going to be profitable to investors or the companies themselves. So it really has to start from, I think, the grassroots level, where every individual tries to make conscientious choices for being more sustainable, socially and as well as in the products that they buy.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks. So well, my next question is, what's the next step for Big and Mini? I mean, you guys already covered a lot of it. Have you thought about go to Shark Tank or get more attention from the investors?
Yeah, we've watched Shark Tank before. We honestly haven't really thought about going on it. It could be fun. But yeah, next steps. we aren't really that focused on raising venture capital at this point. Right now, we're kind of still fine without those funds. We have pretty reasonable timelines, and are really just focused on moving into like senior living facilities, as well as college campuses across the nation. But yeah, the Shark Tank idea is very interesting.
All right. Thanks, Alan. So next question is from Edward. How do you feel about your VC for Big and Mini? Did they have a conversation with you about this social good topic?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't raised a lot of venture capital funding, but the little amount that we have, yeah, a big part of why I think that the venture capitalists invested was because of the social impact side of things. So it's definitely something that people are caring more and more about, and definitely was very important in the investment altogether.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And the next question is from Tommy. Could you publish your slides here?
Here as in?
In this, well.
Let me
Maybe
start.
afterwards.
Yeah, maybe afterwards we can work that out.
Yeah, DCIA officers will work that out with you guys, and then we can publish it through them. The next question is from Julia, and by the way, if you have follow-up questions, you can unmute yourself and follow up with Alan and Anthony. So Julia's question is, does your platform support one-to-many, many-to-many match?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like the way you phrased it because it feels very much like the ideas we think about in computer science a lot. And so one-to-one and one-to-many and many-to-many, we're really focused on one-to-one because we believe that's like the fastest way to get to like a truly deep and long-term connection. But we also have like some, in particular, like group style events where we try to coordinate activities, for example, for like the members of a senior living center, or maybe the members of like a college campus or a school, just different ways of trying to create community. Yeah, it's primarily focused on like the one-to-one match. I don't know, Alan, do you have anything to add?
No, I thought that was good.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. And the follow-up question from Julia is, other than share story, do you provide recommendation for other activities?
We honestly just keep it pretty free form in terms of the conversation. It doesn't even necessarily have to be about sharing stories. We do provide different conversation starters, just kind of like a list that our bigs and minis, when they go on their calls, can use for inspiration. But yeah, activities are definitely something we've thought about as a long-term feature, but at this moment, it's mostly just like free-form conversations, and we don't even set a limit on the time for the calls or the frequency or anything. People can just log on it. We just mandate the first call, and generally people keep meeting weekly at the same time or find a different time. But yeah, very free form overall.
Okay, very cool. And have you done customer research before you start your company?
Yeah, I can talk about that also, I guess. We honestly didn't do that much customer research. Well, I say that, but honestly, the first step when we like started our company was creating a Google form with like just a really simple website that took just a couple hours to set up. So in total, it was just like, yeah, Google form takes less than like a couple hours. So in total, it's just a couple hours to set up our first like minimum viable product, to do the market research that we needed to do. So I guess, yeah, we really did do customer research before we started our company, but it was also kind of like as we started. But we didn't just start building out our platform immediately. We tested it out, and we tested out the idea by building the Google form and static web page. So that's how we kind of did our customer research before spending a lot of time building.
And I guess to an extent, like that's customer research, but it's also like starting the venture itself in a way as well, because we were like actually matching those people through the Google form and actually seeing how that would go. So I guess it differs from like the traditional idea of customer research as like sending out a bunch of surveys. Instead, it was more of like, let's test it out and just actually like try doing what we want to do and see if it works, and then go into like actually building the platform.
Got it. Well, I have a follow-up question. It's connected with this question, but a little bit removed from this question is, so out of all the humanity-related topics, how did you end up picking the loneliness? How does this topic caught your attention and you guys decide to work on this topic?
Yeah, there are a ton of really pressing problems. Honestly, it just, I think, was a product of the timing. We started amidst COVID, and COVID really hit hard for a lot of people's mental health. And also, me and Anthony really weren't in a great position to like create a vaccine. So we didn't end up going after that route. Maybe in like a couple of years we'll be ready for that. But at the time, we looked at our skill sets and we looked at the biggest problems facing society at the time, and loneliness was pretty high up there, and even more pressing than ever because of COVID. So yeah, we kind of just watched the trends and felt that it was the right time to focus on that problem.
Yeah, I was very inspired by you guys because we all went into this global pandemic about the same time, and we all observed all sorts of problems one way or another. But you guys have picked a topic that caught your interest and then took actions about it and made progress about it. So yeah, really inspiring. And the next question is from Calvin Xu. Do you have any competition in the niche market?
I guess if this is like a question about competition in terms of like what we do in particular, there are other like companies that are also matching like younger people and older adults. But in most cases, well, I guess there's two broad categories. In one sense, there's like the like local churches and community groups like matching like their churchgoers to each other. And that's amazing and meaningful, but it's also like limited in scale. And so I guess we differ from them in that respect, in that we made the platform scalable, and that was like kind of one of our initial goals in building out like a whole web platform and a whole system. And then on the other side, you have like the actual institutions, the actual companies. Some examples are like, there's Papa, are there any other ones you can think of, Alan?
Yeah, Monami, Papa, those are the main ones. I mean, there's Eldera.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the main.
Yeah, and primarily those websites, even though they are like matching younger and older adults, they're really more focused on like that aspect of a caregiving relationship, where it's more like the younger person might even get paid, for example, and they'll usually be like getting groceries, helping out with various errands, etc. So it's very much like more of a one-sided like service provider relationship. And so far, we're like the only main platform we've seen that's focused on creating these mutually beneficial relationships where the whole goal is simply to like be a friend and to form a long-term relationship.
Got it. Awesome. And the next question, also from Calvin, is how did you verify product market fitting?
Yeah, for us, the Google form at the beginning was like a good indicator of that. I honestly don't even know if we have complete product market fit at this point. But in terms of attempting to find it, the Google form that we initially built out was a great way for us to kind of figure out whether people were actually interested in this idea.
Okay. Anthony, have anything to add to that question?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. And how do you use network effects to expand the market sharing?
As in, like, to clarify, this is like how we use network effects basically to get more people to hear about Big and Mini?
I believe so, unless Calvin have something to add to that question. I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the specific idea of a network effect, it's like the more people that use the platform, the more valuable the platform is. And so one of the things about like having any sort of matching service is that like your goal is to find the optimum match for each person. So like the more people you have on the platform, the more people you can potentially match with a new person. And as a result, like the larger the platform is, the whole network effect is that when you have more people, you're more likely to find an optimum match, and you could find someone from anywhere in the world to match with like a new bigger mini, and they'd be much more likely to match with you effectively. So like in the narrow sense of like the textbook definition of network effect, that's kind of like why it's useful for more people to be using the platform. But in a broader sense, I think like the fact of more people using the platform also just creates sort of more of a like, I guess, a credibility around the platform. And that's one of the most important things in getting people to not only hear about it, but also just to like trust that this is something that can actually help them. Do you have anything to add, Alan?
No, that was good.
I have a follow-up question since we're on this topic. So once the product, the platform is expanding, the market is expanding, do you worry or feel like any company like Big and Mini or they're doing something very meaningful and purposeful, if the market keeps expanding and at one point they might become one of monopolies in someday? I'm asking this question because you use Tesla's example, more data you collected from the customers, and then you will become more powerful because you will know the market better, and eventually that helps you win the competition over other competitors. Does that make you become sort of monopoly someday?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question because as a startup, you start out and you're like, I hate monopolies. Like, why are there so many like big companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple? And they're just like these like 400-pound gorillas, and they're just like marching around, stomping on all of the little companies that are like trying to do new stuff. But then one day, like every one of those like small startups, like they started somewhere. And so those small startups who once hated monopolies, like eventually, like many of them, or very few of them, but like some of them will become monopolies. So it's like a complex ethical question of whether they have like an obligation to like adhere to their prior views. But I don't really know the answer. I don't know, Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think every startup has the potential to become a monopoly. I don't know. I'm personally conflicted on in what instances monopolies are good and when they're bad, because there are a lot of benefits to monopolies as well,
Yeah.
because their economies of scale allow them to have really like cheap stuff at the heart of it. So I think I'm not sure if that's something we need. Yeah, I think it depends on like the industry and the particular company. But yeah, I think that's a good idea to think about.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's pretty big questions, and I guess nobody really have an answer to that. But yeah, thanks for sharing that to expand our horizon on this topic. So the next question is from Yue Deng. She enjoy the talks. Thanks. What is the biggest challenge to run Big and Mini?
Probably the biggest challenge is the monetization aspect of it, focusing on profit and purpose is sometimes difficult when you have to choose between the two. You don't always have to choose between the two, but sometimes it's hard to figure out the profit part of it if you maintain a very, very strong purpose. But yeah, I still think they go together, but that is a difficult part of it, I guess, for any business in general.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. And next question from Annie. Looking back on this journey, would you do anything differently?
I guess the first thing to say is that, like, with a question about like, would you do anything differently? It's also like hard to answer, because it's like, if you value and you appreciate the position you're in now, it'd be like, it's every event and every also mistake along the way that led to like where we are now. But if I had to answer about like something like a process that I feel like could have been optimized better, I think that, like, in terms of developing like some of the internal features, like for example, for like our own management of users, like I think it's important to try and do something manually first and see what the pain points are before moving to automation. And like, I guess this is kind of abstract, but I think the same pattern happens over and over, where like sometimes I wouldn't understand like the actual mechanisms for like manually doing some task that we had to do over and over again. And so in developing like an automated version of it, because like as software engineers, that's what we love to do. Like developing an automated version of it, I often found that like it might have like had a bunch of inefficiencies. I guess one good example is like our initial like matching dashboard, where what we did was like we had 2 columns matching, and then like a third column where like you could drag a big from one column and a mini from another column into this third column and then create a match. And it was like, intuitively that's like translating what you would do in like the physical world, but like that doesn't actually solve the biggest pain point of manual matching, which is like the act of doing manual matching. So creating the dashboard doesn't actually like solve the problem. So what I would try to do is like, if I had to change, I would probably try to increasingly like figure out in more detail what the pain points I'm actually trying to solve are about like our internal tasks before moving right into automation and doing a bunch of like extra coding that might not even be increasing our efficiency. I don't know, Alan, do you have anything on this question?
Oh, I thought that was good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think a lot of IT professionals can relate to what you just said, that we might be so excited to jump into the task without zoom back and take a look at what is the purpose or the mission. So yeah, good question. And the next one is, from Julia, have you ever think about to get sponsored from organization such as Bill Gates Foundation, as you might share common purpose?
You want to go ahead, Anthony?
I mean, so we have not necessarily the Bill Gates Foundation in particular. We have applied for and I guess received some grants from like various social impact foundations. But yeah, the Bill Gates Foundation is definitely a great one to look at as well. I don't know. Alan, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, there's like an endless kind of number of different foundations. And I think the question is like, how much time do you want to spend trying to find different sponsors for your work as opposed to doing the work?
Yeah.
So that's at the crux of how we decide whether or not to apply or like try to get more funding.
Well, because one of the great things about software is like how low cost it is compared to like a lot of physical industries. So in terms of funding, like for us, we're really lucky because we're in college. So we don't actually like, I guess basically we have more leeway to work for free. So we're able to do a lot of work for free and we can actually just focus more on the work, and then hopefully the work eventually pays dividends in terms of like the funding and then actually like impact on consumers.
I see. Yeah, Julia and myself have asked you guys a couple questions related with investors and fundings, but from what I understand, like from what I hear, for big and mini as of right now, do you guys really feel the need of get the funding from others, or since it's such a low cost platform to build, you guys don't feel having the plan to get more investors and fundings?
Well, I think like the low cost nature is part of it, but like clearly every day we see a lot of like low cost platforms raising a lot of money to go pursue their purpose. And I think for us, it's like we kind of want to figure like cash doesn't solve all problems. And I think sometimes you can throw a lot of money away when you don't need it. And I think for us, we're at a point where we can solve our problems without money, and then money later on will be helpful for accelerating our impact once we figured out the problems.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, software is not actually low cost. It's like the base cost is very low, but actually you pay a lot to get like good software developers, and probably a lot more than you pay people in other industries. So it actually is pretty expensive, but it just, depends on the point in the organization as to like when you actually need that cash.
Got it. Okay. And our next question is from Catherine Lee. Is there anything you created on your platform that junior kids, 11 to 16 years old kids, can do to get prepared for the future scientific and technological challenges and innovation?
Honestly, right now we usually stay away from letting kids that are less than 16 on our platform, just for an overabundance of caution, which is probably going to change in the future once we decide that we want to deal with that age group as well. But yeah, I guess if they're like 16 or older, then potentially like preparing for scientific and technological challenges and innovation in our society is not like a huge focus for us, but it's possible that a junior or a kid or a teen could be matched with someone who has those interests, and that would help them develop those skills.
Although I guess in another sense, maybe like if we're able to at least inspire anyone who's like similar to our age or even younger to kind of like know that they can build something on their own.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's one way to kind of learn a lot and get prepared for the future, because one of the best ways to learn is simply by doing.
True.
Yeah, that's true. So next question from Ben. What is the most important thing you guys think contributing to your startup? For example, any class, curriculum you had at school, or any specific character trait?
It's probably not school. I think class and curriculum have not made a huge impact on this, to say the least. I think being in college or being in school definitely makes a difference, because you encounter different problems, different people, and like general skills that you gain from school definitely help. But I think, yeah, developing some character traits early on around seeing problems and wanting to solve them and believing that you can solve them were definitely much more important, I think. Or yeah, they were probably more important. I don't want to say definitely, but because it's hard to quantify how much impact school has had on general problem solving skills. But yeah, I'd say it's mostly that character trait.
Yeah, I guess to touch more on like the attitude towards school in particular, I feel like school it's very generalized, at least in our current education system, to where most people are expected to be like good at a large number of things. And then also the definition of good is based on like certain standard metrics of like knowing these like 5 topics about like this one field, and then like these 3 things about this other field. There's like a very set and standard curriculum. So I think it's good in terms of like 2 things. One is establishing like a breadth of knowledge where you dip into fields you might not if you didn't go to school. And then the other is in establishing like a common like cultural background where you're like socialized to be able to communicate with everyone else who also like went through the same school system. Like we all know the same like Shakespeare and like Greek and Roman people and like all the other stories basically, and US history as well. So it's like important for, I guess, like socialization and for like increasing the breadth of knowledge. But in terms of actually doing different stuff, like doing unconventional stuff, I think a lot of that just has to happen outside of school, because the nature of school is like very standardized. So school is important, but like definitely doing stuff outside of the school is also very important.
So what motivates you guys to full time? So this is my follow-up questions on Ben's question.
Wait, can you repeat the question? Sorry, I think maybe it was my end, but like I felt like it cut out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. So if class and curriculum does not contribute the most important aspect for your success on Big and Mini and coming to where you are right now, then what are the other things that motivate you to get you here today, to do all those things besides school?
Motivation. It's a big question. Like what is motivation and where does it come from? I think like one thing that both Alan and I like to do is read a lot, and that's certainly helpful for like at least formalizing the vocabulary in which to talk about like social good, for example, and like entrepreneurship, and but more importantly, just like the different ways that it's possible to see the world outside of just like a school context. But as for like fundamental motivation, there comes a point where it's like there's no more like breaking down of the motivation. This is kind of hard to, this is not like, this feels very abstract. I don't know, Alan, you can go ahead.
Like speaking on motivation and I guess yeah, I guess it's just like a desire. I don't know. It's just like a fundamental desire to want to do good and have impact. Probably just a product of environment and growing up. Yeah. Don't have a, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for answering that question. I'm just asking this question for many of our other members here who might have children, who might have younger kids. And I know that a lot of them would be really curious to see how do you guys do and how do you guys get there and get the motivation, inspiration from both of you, because you definitely are the inspiration to many of us. And for our next question here, have you ever taken any entrepreneurship class in college, or you just figure out how to be an entrepreneurship yourself?
So, Alan, you've taken some kind of like entrepreneurship related course, right? I guess you can at least talk about it.
Yeah, I have. I mean, when starting Big and Many, I had not really done any entrepreneurship classes. I had like audited one and kind of just sat in, but it was really about meeting the people. But I did end up taking the class after starting Big and Many. That was pretty helpful, mostly in meeting other people in the space rather than learning a specific curriculum. So I think it was beneficial in that aspect. But in terms of like learning random entrepreneurship principles, I think there's a lot you can just do on your own that doesn't have to be taught from a class. So most of it is just figuring it out on your own.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and personally, I have not taken an entrepreneurship class yet. I don't know. I might take one at some point, but I guess we'll see.
Okay, cool. And the next question, I believe, is from Edward. Talking about attention economy, do you see anything downside on the recommendation system? Like in the end, well, people only view or purchase whatever the companies want them to? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the biggest like potential risks of like having recommendation systems, because like then how do you decide like what's your own desire and what's like a company's desire? And then one of the scary things actually was like the fact that Amazon was able to like, for example, promote like Amazon products over like third-party sellers, where it was like, oh, someone might make a notebook, for example, and then Amazon sees that it's selling well, and then now Amazon all of a sudden has like an Amazon Basics notebook that looks exactly the same, and then it shows up before the other notebooks on like the list of products, and it actually sells better because they put it first. I don't know. I think that is like a problem, and maybe it's a problem that regulation can address. I don't know how well consumer choice in particular could address that, because we kind of have all this like behavior that we just subject to like unconsciously. So like company nudges for recommendation systems really are very effective. So it is a little bit scary sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Ben have another question on, I heard life in high school, college are really busy. How much time you can put to big and mini, like every week?
Mm, I mean, personally, we can put a lot of time, I think.
Yeah.
I think the idea of high school and college being very busy is like, it's a little bit overstated in a lot of communities. I think you can make time, a lot of time, like upwards of 40 hours a week to do other stuff outside of school. If you like manage your time well, and it depends on your focus as well also, I think. But yeah, so I think, yeah, I think you could have upwards of 40, 50 hours a week if you plan your time right.
Yeah, I mean, when they say busy, it's like, it's only busy because you fill up your time doing like things that you want to. Ideally things that you want to, hopefully not things that you don't really want to for
Yeah.
most of the time. But like the base of just like classes and stuff, as long as you can manage your time effectively, is like, yeah, not really that busy. And the reason a lot of people are busy, I think, is just because we all like to involve ourselves with the stuff we're passionate about. And like, if we weren't busy, I guess that would just mean we were sitting around doing nothing. So I kind of hope we are busy, I guess, but like
Well,
busy in a good way.
I do know people that are busy because they like watch a lot of TV shows or something, or like they're like doing studying, but in reality they're like half studying and half watching a show. And like that's what causes people to be busy sometimes. So yeah,
That's
I think
good.
a lot of it is on the individual.
Yep, that's a spirit. So I have a follow-up question, maybe another big question since it's still a few years away from you guys, but have you ever thought about once you graduate, are you gonna take entrepreneurship towards Big and Mini as your full-time job or any other plans?
No idea. I don't know. I have no idea personally. It feels pretty far away, even though technically it's just like a little over a year and a half now. But for me, but I will face that when it comes.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea either. I mean, I'm even earlier in college, so like I probably have even less of an idea. But really, I'm just trying to focus on like learning as much as possible and growing in order to be able to like eventually like continue to make an impact, I guess. So it's really about the process of learning.
Okay, got it. Wonderful. Let's see. I think that is the last of the questions. That was a lot of questions. Thank you, Anthony and Ellen, for answering all of them. And let's take a minute and see if we have any other questions coming up.
And also, like, thank you for all of the questions. I feel like some of them really did get to some pretty important ideas and definitely made me think and maybe rethink sometimes as well.
Thanks, Anthony, for saying that. Let's see, actually, since we are at the end of the Q&A session here, if you have any other questions, you can also just unmute yourself and say it out. Okay, and I guess that's all the meetings, that's all the questions we have today. And let me take another look here. Yep. So I'm just gonna wrap up the meeting. We are about 30 minutes earlier, but we do get a lot of questions answered from Anthony and Alan, so really appreciate that. And I'd like to thank everyone for your time and your questions. Special thanks to our organizer, DCIA, Julia, Edward, and Frank. Last but not least, our fantastic speakers, Alan and Anthony. So I'm gonna share the screen real quick here. Okay, so if you would like to join more seminars and events like this and network with other Chinese IT professionals, please leave your email address to our officer. He is DFWCIA. He's named after DFWCIA here in the Zoom chat, and DCIA will reach out to you afterwards. And if you would like to build up your public speaking and leadership skills and deliver awesome speeches like Anthony and Alan did today, you are invited to scan the QR code here. Let me minimize this one. On the right to join Texas Tech Talk Toastmasters Club. Okay, and in the chat box. Okay. And with that, the seminar is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you in our future events.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Alan and Anthony, for an excellent speech. I'm very inspired. I have been working in IT for 20 years, but today's your speech really give us a very unique perspective how to use technology for purpose. A lot of time we only think about, we use technology to solve our business issue, make our company more profitable, more successful. But you guys really provide a different angle. Thank you very much for sharing that. And you also set up a great example for our young generation, not just to pursue academic excellence, but also pursue meaningful purpose of their life. And it's also kind of educated to myself. Yeah, because when I educate my kids, yeah, we are more focused on academic, but I know they now knows how to pursue their own purpose too. Yeah, thank you very much. And also I would like to thank Avina for an excellent job for moderating this event.
Yeah,
She is our VP of membership of Texas Tech Talk, a new Toastmaster Club we just funded in June for DCIA. Our mission is to help our IT professional to improve your communication skill. You can see Avina how she demonstrated her public skill right now. So welcome to join DCIA Texas Tech Talk Toastmaster Club. At the end, I would like to thank Frank, our VP of Education, and his director, Tian Yu, and Jason for organizing the whole event. Excellent job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think Alan and I would also like to definitely thank all the DCIA officers for helping to organize this, and Avina for being such a great moderator for our session today. So thank you.
Anthony and Alan for coming here, and yeah.
Oh, by the way,
Tomorrow.
I think we have a special guest here today, Annie Liu, who is my mentor from Toyota Financial Services, and she is a national manager. A couple of months ago, I actually had the lunch with Annie, and I shared our DCIA mission. She is very interesting about our organization, and she already joined us as a member. Annie, do you want to say something about today's event?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Annie Liu. Really enjoyed today's talk. Anthony and Alan, really looking forward to your success in the future. So thank you for sharing. This was very informative, and I look forward to future sessions.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, welcome to join our events in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And our VP, Frank Law, do you have anything to share to our audience today?
You got me unprepared.
You don't need to prepare. Just tell something from your heart.
Just everybody, as you can see, we have so many meaningful seminars. We learn either from hard skills or soft skills from the seminars. Just make sure that whenever you can, please participate the seminars and meetups, and we all grow together.
Yeah. Thanks, Frank. Okay, let's get back to Avina, our moderator.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Yeah, so I think that's it for our seminar today. And thanks again for everyone's participation, questions, and speeches. So yeah, hope to see you guys soon in the near future's events, and hope all the success to Alan and Anthony in your school and in your future careers.
Yay. Thank you
Thanks so much.
again, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, bye guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.